Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia. This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning. Hi, this is Chelsea with a producer's note. This week, we're very excited to kick off a new series called Voices in Teaching, where Katie and I will interview educators who have been recognized for innovation and excellence in their craft. Our first featured educator is Megan Helberg, who hails from rural Loup County, Nebraska, where she taught 8th through 12th grade English for 15 years. In 2020, Helberg received the prestigious honor of being named the Nebraska Teacher of the Year. Helberg is passionate about Holocaust and genocide education, having received a Fund for Teachers grant to visit Holocaust-related sites throughout Europe and to purchase Holocaust literature resources for her school. Megan was named a Museum Teacher Fellow for the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in 2016 and now assists the museum as a mentor for incoming teacher fellows. Helberg was selected as a Lowell Milken Center Fellow in 2021, to the Olga Lengyel Institute Summer Seminar in 2022, and recently was selected to study at the highly acclaimed institution Yad Vashem. She's also the 2024 Anne Frank Educator of the Year. Megan recently accepted a job with the Anne Frank Center, the Anne Frank House's official partner in the USA, where she now travels the world to share resources, educational opportunities, and peer-to-peer trainings centered on the Frank family, the Holocaust, and the lessons of history that are still highly relevant to today's learners. I met Megan this summer in Washington, D.C. while tagging along as Katie pursued her USHMM Museum Teacher Fellowship, and I was excited during research for this episode to discover a video clip of Megan meeting with Dr. Jill Biden at the White House. That's where we'll jump into this interview. Thanks for joining us on 16 to 1.
Can I say really quickly that Megan is a better person than I would ever be? Because if I met Dr. Jill Biden, nobody would know anything else about me. That would be my first thing everywhere. Hi, I'm Katie. Dr. Joe Biden surprised me once. Okay. So you're far better of a woman than I am.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but it was a pretty incredible experience, I will say. So when I was Teacher of the Year for 2020, of course, that was during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of our Teacher of the Year activities and events got canceled or postponed. And honestly, it was a huge bummer, but it was one of those weird situations where you couldn't really grieve or show some signs of like letdown, because that also seemed very like selfish and compared to what was going on like in the larger scope of the world. But it was also kind of like this internal like little grieving process too for a lot of these really cool things that were supposed to happen and then didn't. But our cohort was the first group to be allowed into the White House post-COVID. So it was this really big deal because the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, who is a teacher, and I must point out, she is the only First Lady in history to keep her job. She is still an active teacher while she is First Lady. So she teaches night courses and she reads the book Night, which is a Holocaust book that I also read with my students. So we talked about that. But anyway, we get to the White House. The night before, I get this call, and I had missed the call because I was out eating with my Teacher of the Year friends. And I got back and I checked my messages, and it was like, Megan, this is the White House calling. You need to call us back tonight. It doesn't matter. We're open 24/7. And I'm like, what?
Of course.
And I kind of thought, I was like, is this for real? You know,
I'm getting punked.
it's like 10:30 at night. I dial this number, you know, I'm like, hi, this is Megan Helberg. I was supposed to call this number. They're like, oh yes, when you come to the White House tomorrow, would you be available for 10 or 15 minutes after the ceremony to just answer a few questions, mostly for marketing purposes? And I'm like, sure, that would be really cool. Thank you. Well, then fast forward to the next day. Everyone's so excited. There's a lot of energy. I had completely forgotten about this. So we go through the ceremony. The First Lady is there. The President shows up. I mean, it is just incredible. The weather was beautiful. Everyone's soaking it in. And after the event, there's these White House staffers just going around yelling, Megan Helberg, Megan Helberg. And so I was like, oh yeah. They're like, are you ready to go do your extra little questions. I'm like, oh, yeah, sure. Okay. So they pull me aside and they're like, this is a really special day for you. We just want you to have a really enjoyable time. If there's anything you want to take pictures of, feel free. If you want to be in the pictures, we'll take your pictures. Just have an amazing experience. I'm like, oh, cool. Okay. So in that case, I'm like, oh, here and here and please here and now here. Okay. So then the ceremony for all of the teachers.
Yeah.
Exactly. I totally was too. So then the ceremony was in the Rose Garden on the kind of the lawn area for all the teachers of the year. But then we started going inside. Like I was going inside with the White House staff. And I'm like, oh, okay. I thought we were just going to answer some questions over by like a tree or something. So then we go inside. We're in the First Lady's hallway. Then we go into the map room, which was the original Situation Room. There's like all these amazing artifacts in there. And they start miking me up. And I'm like, whoa, okay. They're like, okay, we're going to walk across the hall. But just know that when you open the door, the cameras are going to be rolling because we just need like some B footage, to have. I'm like, okay. Cool. So I'm like not nervous at all. I just am like, whew, this is cool, just walking around the White House. And I open the door and the First Lady is standing there. It's the White House Library. And she's like, Megan, surprise. Would you like to have a little chat with me? And I did the whole like clutch. I was like, oh my gosh. And then we hugged. And as we hugged, I said, this is so splendid. I never say splendid. And so then all my friends later on were like, oh,
it's splendid.
Like, but we went on to have this amazing conversation. And there was all these photographers and video people, and they all started clapping and they're like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. And we just want you and the First Lady to sit down and talk about the joys of teaching. Like we know that there are issues in education, but today is all about the joy of teaching. And we just want you to exchange some of your favorite stories and memories from teaching. It was incredible. And then I got a tour of the White House and then I started crying because there's more. They gave me some good advice because as I kept it together the whole time I was with the First Lady. And then when we left, she's like, oh, one more hug. I'm like, okay. And so we hugged and then they're like, okay, Megan, are you ready for your private tour of the White House? And I'm like, there's more. And I was like, I'm just going to need a minute. And they're like, oh no, this is all totally okay. You're doing so great. And I'm like, why is this happening to me? And then like all these things came crashing in. I'm like, wait, I think I missed the bus back to the hotel, like with the rest of the teachers. And I'm like, are the other teachers then going to do this? Like I was completely confused. And the staff of the White House were so kind. They said, Megan, sometimes you don't have to know why something is happening. Just embrace it while it is. And you know what? That has come in handy many times even since then. So it was a lovely experience. It was a splendid.
Chelsea sent me that when I was at work one day. All it said was "what" in all caps, and it was all I could see was Joe Biden. And I was like, "Oh, what's Jill doing?" Because I love Joe Biden. And then it's like the 2020, and I was like, "No!" I was losing it. I was like, one, how freaking cool. Two, how did she never bring this up? Chelsea and I watched it a couple of times, and I could just tell like your face was just like. You were going through it, trying to figure out what do I say, what do I do, like all of the, niceties of the White House. Yeah. It's amazing.
It was an incredible experience. And I will say, like on a serious note, when I got back home, because they said, when this drops, you will know. People will reach out to you. And it was going to be on all the White House like socials and everything, but they didn't know exactly when it was going to be ready. Well, when I flew back home, it had dropped while I was on the flight. And so when I landed, I had like 250 text messages, like hundreds of notifications on Facebook and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But when I went back to school, it was really amazing because I watched the video with my students and I will never forget this one girl. She said, Mrs. Helberg, I feel so seen. She goes, you talked about us. Like when you were talking about different examples, she was like, that's art class. You're talking about art class. She was, I have never felt so seen. And that really resonated with me because sometimes we need to make sure that we are helping our students be seen in whatever way that might be. So that was a big moment and kind of made it really resonate.
Yeah. How cool for your kids to feel like there was some ownership there, that this was their teacher.
They're like, we know we exist. They know that we're here. I'm like, yes, exactly. And that matters, right? That matters to everyone.
Yeah, it was fun to get to send that to Kate with her not knowing that it existed. I was like, I don't know Megan super well, but it looks to me like she was genuinely surprised by walking into this room and seeing Joe Biden there. So I needed to get the story. So thank you for telling that tale. Very cool experience.
It really was. And I do have to give a shout out to my Teacher of the Year cohort because they were incredibly supportive of me and that experience. And they were just as excited and giddy as I was. So that made it even more enjoyable that I could soak that in. When I was growing up, I never thought I would be a teacher. It feels like a lot of people that I meet that are teachers have known since they were like 3 years old that they wanted to be a teacher. That was absolutely not me. My mom was a teacher and a very highly decorated teacher. She was into project-based learning before that was even a term. She was a Holocaust educator before the Holocaust Museum in DC even existed. And so I always thought, well, that's what my mom does. My mom is a really great teacher. And then when I got done with college and I thought I was going to become a pharmacist and I was working at a pharmacy, and I came home one day and I realized that as much as I respected that profession in modern medicine and how that had kept my dad alive, my dad is a heart transplant recipient. He's going to be celebrating his 30th anniversary since his heart transplant, the longest living heart transplant survivor in Nebraska, I must add. So we are feeling incredibly grateful for organ donors. But I appreciated that side of medicine, but I realized this was not like feeding me. I kind of felt like I was working retail and that's not something I wanted. And when I sat down and really thought about it, I was like, oh my gosh, I think I want to be an English teacher. What? Like this was not on my brain at all. I took one education class in college and was like, nope. But anyway, now spoiler alert, here I am, teacher for over 15 years. I am from a very small rural community in central Nebraska. We call it the Sandhills. It's the geographic region. So it's like green, beautiful rolling hills, a lot of cattle ranches. That's where I live. I live on my family's cattle ranch and really have a strong respect and need to take care and tend to the land. But I graduated with 10 kids in my graduating class, and we were all incredibly close. It doesn't mean we were all best friends, but we had this unique experience of where we never lost anybody. No one moved away or anything like that. So it was the same group of kids that went from kindergarten through 12th grade. You get to know so much about someone that those sort of bonds and friendships and relationships can really never be replicated. And as I got older and I looked back on my educational experience, I realized I really loved that. And I felt incredibly lucky to have that experience because when you go to a small school, you don't have to specialize in anything. You don't have to pick like, oh, I'm going to play basketball, or I'm going to be in the band, or I'm going to be an FFA or student council. It's like I was able to be in every single activity that our school offered, except for choir. We draw the line there. I was much better on the trumpet than I am singing. But it's just like, what a unique experience. And I feel like it made me such a well-rounded person that as I went through life and became an adult, I could have these like shared interests and conversations with a variety of different people rather than just one group. And so I am a huge proponent of small schools. So when I decided to become a teacher, I knew that I wanted to work in a small school because you hear like the joke, and it's kind of joking, kind of serious sometimes, of teachers who are like, it's after hours. You don't know me. Like, I see you at the grocery store. Nope, sorry. I wanted the exact opposite of that. I wanted to see my kids at the grocery store. I wanted to see them at the local cafe, at the gas station, at a wedding reception, all dancing together out there, I wanted that. And so, because that's what I had, and it made me a lot closer with my teachers, and they got to know me as a person, and it helped them educate me. And so I wanted to be that same sort of teacher where I knew my kids both inside of school and outside of school, so I could be a better teacher to each one of them. And if you're a new teacher, you apply to like maybe, however many schools, 10 different schools or whatever, and the one that you get accepted to is maybe not the one that was in your top choice, like give it your all no matter what. You can make such a huge difference. It's like, leave it better than you found it sort of a thing. Maybe you're only there for 1 year, but wouldn't it be amazing that if you left when you're leaving, that people go, oh man, we're really going to miss them, instead of like, oh, glad they're gone. We could tell that they didn't really care about the school, right? Like, you don't want to be that teacher.
Yeah.
You don't. You've really got to give it your all no matter where you are. For those kids, they don't know that it's your dream school or not your dream school. For them, you are their teacher.
Yep.
And so you better be giving it your all no matter where you are for those kids at that time.
Yeah. I would definitely say that where I am now isn't where I thought I would be. Not like in a bad way, just like my commute's like 40 minutes. And so I always kind of thought I'd be closer to home and like where I live. I think what you're saying is true though, because every year I've invested more, but I've gotten more out of it too. My willingness to be devoted, I don't know if that's the right word, but my willingness to invest, because I was giving more freely or more of myself or whatever, and that's what kept me there. Like, that's what has made it so I keep going back.
Exactly. I'm so glad you pointed that out, because I mean, it's like cliche, but it's so true. It's like the more you give, the more you get. And I just want to encourage people, new teachers or teachers who have been out there for a while, and maybe you are looking for a different school, like, please don't overlook those rural schools. You can have an enormous impact in a rural school, not just on the school, but on the entire community. And it can be an incredibly like rewarding experience. I mean, it's been the opportunity of a lifetime for me to be a teacher in a small school, but not just a school, but I'm also a part of the community. And that feels really amazing.
I'm really interested in some of the unique aspects of smaller and rural school communities. And I wonder about the relationship between what you just described with teachers kind of finding their way and their role in an education community. What do you think are some of the strategies or practices that teachers might accept into their day-to-day that help students find their place in community as well?
Yes, I got tired of hearing like some of these kind of like poo-poo sort of talk on rural schools and rural kids, and kind of like the jokes. Then people go, oh, we're just kidding. But like, they're kind of serious, of like, they don't think that kids who are from a rural area have as high a quality as education as maybe their peers in an urban environment or something like that. And so I always say, my students are not any less eager to learn because they are in a rural setting. They just need opportunities. And I see myself as one of those teachers that can bring them those opportunities. So my advice for any teacher, no matter what stage of your career, is bring the opportunity. Think big, think bold, do something else. And I will tell you, for me, that is what has kept me in education all these years, is like trying something kind of big and scary. And hey, we're going to try this big contest, or we're going to do something over here, that's maybe kind of wacky, but we're going to see, right? And it's that sort of stuff, those projects, those opportunities. Yes, it's for the students, but it's also for me too. It's like, if this is my life and I'm going to be spending like 75% of my, time at the school, I also want to enjoy it. And I also want to learn. And I also want to try new things, like right along with the kids. And I think doing that with them lets them see that. Like, they may not realize it right in the moment, but it's like, hey, Helberg's trying something kind of new and crazy. We'll see how it goes, right? But it maybe gives them then that courage to try something new and crazy. But you talk about community building. That's something I'm really passionate about. So In a small community, it literally takes everyone to make the community thrive, right? We don't just want to be surviving. We want to be in a community that's thriving. And that takes people from all sectors of the community. I think it's worth one class period, maybe two, of we have a talk about with students as they are getting older, maybe that sophomore, junior, senior range. And I just write questions on the board. What does it mean to be welcoming? What's the difference between welcoming and then knowing that you belong? What are some things that you like about our community? What are some things you wish that our community had that it doesn't? What are the steps to get there? And we go through and we spend a couple class periods talking about this because the students need to know that they are hopefully going to be the adults in the community in the next 10 years, right? Sometimes when you invite kids to the table to be a part of those conversations, it can be really scary because it's like, who's the adult in charge? And sometimes their ideas are really horrible. But you're like, yeah, but it's okay. Like slap it up there, right? Put the idea up there, because then them facilitating the discussion between themselves, like realizing that in a few years, they could be each other's neighbors. They could be each other's coworkers. They're the ones that are in elected positions in our community. It makes them see themselves in a totally different way. It's almost like you're bringing the curtain back and they can like peek behind the scenes of what it takes to like run a community. I wish there was more of that went on in schools. So like teachers, don't be afraid to take one or two class periods. You can tie it into pretty much any subject area and have these conversations about community. Being at a smaller school, when you know their interest, you know their family, you know their background, it does let you kind of hone in on like where in the community do they think they currently fit? And is that where they see themselves, or do they wish they were in kind of a different area of the community? Or maybe they don't want to be in the community at all. Maybe they want to graduate and go off and do something else, and that's totally fine too.
I hear Kate speaking to that occasionally. She's in your school. I hear you speaking about this transient nature. I guess students are passing through and they feel like they're passing through. They feel like they're kind of just this temporary person who happens to be turning up in a place at a time to receive instruction. And I think that community building aspect can be more successful to the extent that students don't feel like they have an expiration date and they're just waiting for it to come. And I hear Kate brainstorming a lot with her colleagues about how do we engage students in their own community building and learning processes? How do we make them see this as not something that's just happening to them? I'm really curious about community norms and even administrative buy-in, how all of this works together to create that sense of permanence and belonging, even though it is the fact that at the end of the day, we're looking to graduate you out of here.
I think the trend has changed a little bit, at least in our community and kind of some of the surrounding areas. When I graduated from high school just a couple years ago, it was like this big, like you heard from parents and stuff, graduate, go off to school, go like make something of yourself. But it was almost like, but that can't happen here.
Yeah.
So like go off and do that someplace else. Even though these people were supporting us, the stands were packed for our games, they were showing up and cheering us on, whether it was speech meets or whatever. And now the trend has really changed. There is this huge movement of kids, yes, graduating, going off to college, but then coming back. This group of returners, that we call them, they're back. They see themselves as entrepreneurs. They have ideas to start up businesses in the local community. And that wouldn't happen unless they heard from adults in the community that, hey, you can do this. This can happen. We will support you. That's a great idea. If they were told, no, just go off and do that someplace else, then they will. So it really has to start with the adults. I kind of touched on it earlier of the days of like kind of putting down your hometown and putting down your school. I so want those days to be over. Kind of this, sort of thing, mentality. It's like, yeah, I did graduate from there and I received a top-notch education and I have followed my dreams and accomplished all of my goals doing that from right here in rural central Nebraska, and you can too. So I think to your point, the best way for students to see that is for the adults in their community to live out their dreams. Go and chase your goals and have fun while you're doing it.
Yeah.
I want my community to be a great place to live, work, and play.
Yep.
We forget about that third option. So the best way to attract kids back to your community, I would say, is to make sure they see you working, living, and playing right from here so they know that they can do it too.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, teaching in Appalachia, I hear a lot of the same things because it's like, it's going to be greener somewhere else, right? And so there's not a lot of like, grow where you are. And it's almost backwards to be like, we're going to launch you out of here and not reap any of the benefits of this incredible education that you've been given. And so I always think the same thing, Megan. Like, there's that small town mind of like, you have to get out of here and staying here isn't success. But at the same time, it's like, well, what are we doing here? If the thing is that our kids succeed by leaving, then what am I doing by staying? And so it's like good enough for your teachers and for all these other people who make your community run, right? But somehow not for you. And I understand wanting kids to go get life experiences because many of my kids have never even left the state. Many of my students have never been to Columbus. So I want to encourage them to go do these things, but I also don't want them thinking that this isn't a worthy place to plant themselves to make better too. So it's like you're doing both.
Exactly. What you said is so important. Like, your hometown is a worthy place to call home. I'm so glad that we're starting to see a little bit of a shift in that trend, and more students are starting to come back and see themselves there. And it's like, look at you, like what you said, you are like rocking it where you live. You're getting all sorts of these amazing fellowships that take you all over the world, and you're learning from the top of the top in these fields, right? And you're bringing that back. I would put, my students' education and some of their knowledge up against anybody in the country in certain areas. That's why I just feel it's so vital for teachers to go after these opportunities. Like we say, oh, we want these kids to go after opportunities, but teachers, you have to go after them too, or else the kids aren't going to get them. Apply for the thing that you never thought you might get. Go for it. Yes, your local district training or state training, wherever you go for continuing education, I'm sure that has value and is great too. But there is something magical that happens inside of yourself as a teacher when you apply for a big time fellowship or a big time grant and you get it. Then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, yeah, okay. Your students see that, your community sees that, and all of a sudden you are like the change maker. You're the mover and shaker. You're the one that's creating good in your community. And that's such a relief. And the kids should see that as a relief too. It's a relief, and it's empowering to know that we are all capable of creating good. We don't need somebody from the outside or the big city to like come in and save us and tell us how to run our school and tell us how to run our community. We can do it. But we have to have quality education from quality teachers who are out there improving themselves and taking these risks. You mentioned travel. For me, travel gives kids both sides of the coin. I am incredibly passionate about travel. I love to travel all across the world. I've got one continent left to go, Antarctica. It'll be coming up soon. But to me, that's the best way to learn, is like when I dive in with all 5 of my senses. I started a travel club at my school, but it was also for the community. So it wasn't just for kids. I opened it up to adults in the community who had not really traveled before, and they were maybe a little intimidated about the travel process. And it created this amazing bond, even stronger, between the students and the community and all this stuff. It was incredible. Anyway, we did several trips, but what it showed them is when we went to all these like big cities that they've always heard about, they loved it. We had amazing experiences there. We did all the things. But then they also saw the other side of the coin of like, you know what? Maybe where we live is not so bad. It's pretty peaceful. We don't have to worry about this or that. We don't have to lock our doors. So that's the beauty of travel. It's like, I want them to graduate and I want them to go and leave our town for a little bit, whether that's college, military, working. Get out of here for at least a little bit, but then come back and share with us what you've learned, and let's make this community thrive.
I would love to know more about how you see travel as a tool to broaden student horizons. What were your students most excited to talk about when they came back from some of these places? How do those values or other perspectives to which students are exposed when they travel, how do those filter back into your educational community?
Several examples are popping to my mind. I was originally going to go on one trip. That was it. We were going to go on one trip to Washington, D.C., specifically to, the Holocaust Museum was going to be a big part of that. I'm very passionate about Holocaust and genocide education, which I feel links very strongly to community building. I know that may sound weird, but I think it's very true. But we had such an amazing, impactful, meaningful, empowering trip that when we came back, already the whole rest of the school, community, parents, when are we going to do it again? Are we going to do this again next year? I mean, the excitement was like palpable within the school and the community. It made kids be able to see themselves in a different setting because, not every single kid is going to move back home, and that's okay. But it kind of gave them a glimpse of what life could be like, living in a city center, doing mass transit. And it kind of allowed them to dream a little bit. It made their imaginations pop up of, well, I was going to go back and come back home and do this, but you know what? Maybe I do want to move to Boston for a couple years and try this job at an art gallery and just see. Because I always tell the kids, you can always come back home. Always. We will welcome you with open arms. So if you want to go explore and have some adventures, like go for it. And then if it doesn't work out, that's okay. Come back. And that doesn't mean that it's a failure that you've come back. Like you were saying earlier, Katie, maybe that's exactly what you needed to try these areas in other places. What I've found with all these travel club trips is the stuff that's not on the itinerary is the stuff that's been the most impactful. For example, we went to San Francisco, and within an hour of being there, we saw several homeless people. And that is something that is kind of a shock for my students who do not see that at all, ever in our area. And it brought up, while we were on the bus, it brought up this really great conversation that we had about homelessness in America. That would have never happened if we hadn't seen this with our own eyes. We had this conversation about, well, people don't just grow up dreaming to be homeless. Things happen along the way. It's not just like, oh, they don't work hard enough or addiction or like there's so many more sides to it than sometimes my students want to see or want to admit. And so to have these deep conversations, to know that not everybody lives like we do, and that's okay. To know that not everybody worships like you might, and that's okay. I mean, we have all these things where we say, oh, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. But do we really think that? Do we really believe that? For my students, I will say that's one of the cons, in my personal opinion, is that we are pretty homogenous here in this area. So I want them to see the different ways of people's faith and how people choose to live and how people choose to work and how people choose to go about problem solving, that it may not be the way that we would do it. And that's okay, right? That's the beauty of America. And so I feel like they actually get a better sense of what our freedoms are and what our rights are by seeing diversity in our country. Then it really can impact them of going, oh,
Yeah.
I get it. Sometimes you can only talk about it so much until they just have
For
to
sure.
see it and experience it for
I'm a
themselves.
product of a smaller rural school system, and I feel like my eyes were opened pretty aggressively and quickly when I left. And it's not that what I learned when I went away from home was that what I learned at home was wrong. What I learned from school and from my upbringing was very incomplete and also very detached from reality. There were a lot of values-based things happening in the community and the instruction in the schools. I developed a set of values and things that I cared about, but I think going out into the world is how you see where the rubber meets the road for a lot of people and how all of those values can be predicated on assumptions that aren't true for everyone. It's really easy to talk about respecting differences if you're never exposed to what those differences really look like in somebody's life.
Bingo.
So
Yes.
I see a lot of
That's
value in going away and like you're saying, and coming back with that, with the what I learned.
And to have that be also with adults in our community, it was like tenfold more impactful because it
Yeah.
wasn't just students seeing it. It was also adults in our community that needed to see that and be aware. I'm born and raised in this community. I chose to move back. This is where I call home and I'm proud of it. That doesn't mean it's perfect. That doesn't mean that everything's hunky dory, right? And so I would say, kind of different views than a lot of people that I live with in my community, neighbors, fellow teachers, parents, stuff like that. But I have never had a parent complaint about my teaching in the classroom because they trust me. They know me. They know at the end of the day, I'm not trying to do something crazy and radical with their kids. I am trying to make them be aware of issues that are going on in the world outside of our community and how they impact our community, even though we may feel like they don't. And I always say, I just want you to see that there's another side. You can then decide whatever side of the coin you want to be on, but I just want to make you see that there is another side because sometimes we forget that there is another side of the coin. So let me show you both sides and then you can make your decisions on how you want to live your life and how you want to create your values and stuff like that as you go out into the world. But let's make sure that we're aware of both sides before we do that.
I've told Chelsea a few times about the long game of teaching.
Oh, yes.
I'm teaching you to think. And someday you will. And I don't know when. And you might not get a grade for it.
Yes.
Like, it will probably not be graded. It will probably not be anytime that I see you. But I'm like, yes, but I have at least fed them with another side. And I have fed them with doubt. And from there, they have to go do whatever they want with it. Lots of them maybe don't do anything. But those that do, I probably get an Instagram message from in 5 years saying, hey.
I've never used the term long game, but I like that because that's exactly what the goal is. Like, I get frustrated sometimes when people want to know how we can assess Holocaust education. And my response is, you watch their choices and actions 10 years down the road.
Yes.
That's my personal belief. I know you got to figure out some way to assess it, I guess. But in my opinion, it's like, we will know 10 years down the road when they are voting, when they are speaking out, their actions towards others, how they treat people in their community. That's the assessment. Sometimes I wish that teaching wasn't so focused on assessment. I'll just be very blunt. I don't care for state testing and high stakes testing and all that sort of stuff. But I am 100% interested in how my students are as adults 10 years down the road, when there is maybe something pretty big impacting our community, our state, our country. How do they act then? Sometimes it's still disappointing. Sometimes you're pleasantly surprised. I will take all the time. It's like these little shifts that make the community change. And it seems like progress is so slow sometimes, but then you can see it, like you really can.
We're recording this right before the 2024 general election in the US. This is going to be released just a few days after the election. Come and listen to this episode for a little inspiration if you need some grounding one way or the other based on the results of the election. But we just did an episode on misinformation and how much time school administrators are investing weekly, hours and hours dealing with the effects of misinformation. And that's not even necessarily super political misinformation. That's just somebody spreading rumors about some school event on Facebook or something like that. All of these forces, stuff fighting for our attention. How do we find a moment for quiet and for listening and for honoring difference and others in the school environment where you have to be always finding this middle road? How do you find a middle road and not compromise your ideals as an educator who cares about helping people find truth and information? How do you weigh all of that?
It's difficult, but then again, it's not. I tell my students, without mentioning names or things like that, to me personally, it's about how people are treated, and especially how people are treated that maybe are different than us. That, to me, is how I approach politics within the classroom, or depending on what we're reading. I was an English teacher, so we did a lot of reading. Strip all the policy away, strip all of the price of gas and the price of a carton of eggs, the stuff that people seem to get caught up on. Let's strip that away for a second and let's look at how people are treating other people. That's what we are trying to teach you to do while you're students, is how do you treat other people, especially the people that aren't really in your circle, right? That's what I'm concerned with at a local level within my classroom. And that's what I'm concerned with at a national level with our national politics. And I have found that has worked quite well for me I'm getting very practical here for like maybe new teachers or teachers. I have not received pushback in that regard because I keep people's names out of the situation, and you bring it down to, hey, how are you treating that person at lunch? How are you treating that person over here at PE? I heard something that you did that wasn't very good. Should we talk about that? How do you want to change your actions? Do you think that do you want somebody to be leading our country that treats people that way? I don't think so. Right. But you never have to say anybody's name. It's about how you treat people, especially those that are outside of your circle. And that is where Holocaust and genocide education comes in. That is where community building comes in. This is where all this stuff meshes together. I always say that growing up and living in a small town is the quickest way to learn peaceful conflict resolution. You cannot just go and go off on someone in your small town community, because guess what? You're going to need them to come fix your sink next week, or you're going to need them to come repair a belt on your car in a couple months, right? That is the reality of living in a small community. And so I wish that they could see that and how we treat each other, even though we don't all have to be best friends, but we kind of need each other in here. And so you can't just go off on someone. You can't do that and still expect to have friendships and relationships and business in a small town. And even as a teacher, several of my former students, I have to do business with them. All these things come together. Like with teaching, it's like, I don't care if you're a straight A student. I just want you to know that I care about you. I want you to get as much out of this as you can. Go live the life of your dreams. And if I can help you go towards that in any way, yes, we've all succeeded. I'm very proud and happy to say that I'm great friends with many of my former students, and love to see them and love to catch up with them and love to hear from them. And I think it goes both ways. I think they like to catch up with me too and stay in touch with me too and see me out and about in the community. I heard something the other day that really resonated with me. It was like, okay, it's 2 days after the election and you wake up. What sort of community do you want to live in? And what is your role in this community? Knowing that no matter which way the election goes, about half of Americans are going to be upset and half of Americans are going to be overjoyed. How do we then come together as a country? And I do believe that it starts in the classroom. These high school kids in 4 years, they're going to be the ones seeing this, and we can use it as an opportunity to be like, is this the country that you want to wake up in? Or would you rather wake up with a different scenario? I think even for adults too, we need to think about that. What do we want to see around our town? What do we want to see in our schools? How do we want to interact with people? What really matters? This is just my own little nerdy self here, but it's like, if we had the presidential candidates apply to be a principal at a school, but they left their names off of it. Maybe you had the principal quit and you need somebody quickly and you're like, hey, we only got a couple candidates. We got to have somebody, but we want to make sure that they're safe and that they're good for our students and, things like that. I don't know if I need to say anything more. It's like, if we wouldn't even hire some of these people to be a principal at our schools, should they be
Yeah.
hired to run the country? So it's like, but taking that like on a smaller level, that helps me put things into perspective when I'm also looking at qualities of leaders, not just nationally, but also in your own community and your own state.
Insert anyone into that, and that line of thinking should work.
Exactly.
It does not matter. Is it your local county commissioner? Is it your state rep? Is it your mayor? I'm going to start using that with my kids because I like that idea. Like, who would we want in charge of us?
Yes. We need to make sure that these students realize that and like think of some of these things. Just because they're running for public office doesn't make them some automatically important, perfect person. We need to be aware of who we're voting for.
It sounds to me like you've already considered this because you're not a fan of standardized tests. I'm concerned that schools are a little overly obsessed with assessment and ranking and a little less focused than maybe they should be on helping students discover their strengths, their passions, what's going to kind of motivate them and propel them once they get out into these communities beyond the school walls. I'm curious whether you think we need a big wake-up call, a big shift in schools, whether we can kind of get there incrementally. It just feels like we're in unique and challenging times with the way that we communicate, the way that we socialize, all of these things. Even post-COVID, we've had to reckon with some of this stuff and what that did kind of fracture communities or even bring them together in some cases. I'm curious if you think that schools have a new mandate to address all of this, and if so, what that should be.
I feel like education is at a tipping point. I've been saying that for about 5 years now. But I do feel like we are at this unique moment in time where it's like, what direction do we want the future of education to go? Education in America today gets a lot of things right. And I think there are some things that we need to tweak and we need to update and we need to shift directions. It's so hard though, because it feels like such an enormous beast, right? I mean, it feels like this enormous machine, and to get things changed sometimes takes a really long time. I think back to like my parents, there was no like map testing, standardized testing. And you know what? They turned out just fine. They went on and had great careers, raised great family, all this stuff. Why are we focusing on that? I really get confused sometimes on what is the mission? Like we were saying, what's the long game? Is the long game that they can pick out the topic sentence of this paragraph? Or is the long game they're like a joyful adult taking opportunities when they come their way, learning, going on adventures, bringing those back to their community, their family, whatever that may look like for each person? I do think education is at a tipping point. I am glad I am not in charge of the direction that that's going to go, because I don't feel like I really have a good answer. It's just, I do wish that we incorporated, we were talking about play earlier in the community. I also think that we've lost a little bit of the sense of play in schools. And even high schoolers need play.
Totally agree.
I want to
Totally agree with
play
you.
and I'm an adult, right? It's like, so I feel like if we kind of shifted more to this, maybe a little bit more hands-on, a little less, sage on the stage, which I get it. It's so hard because when you're doing a unit and it's like, yeah, this is my jam. Listen and learn, kids. Let me impart my wisdom. Now, don't get me wrong. I do that sometimes, but I try to do it less and let them educate each other more, like kind of be more of a facilitator and let them have these conversations amongst themselves and discussions. I guess this question that keeps coming up in my head is like, does your school love itself? And how do you know? That's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And if you were to go and ask any person in any school, that is a great place to start. Because if the answer is yes, great. Tell me why. Tell me what's going well. If the answer is no, tell me what needs to change. Instead of breaking it down into like these very tactical steps, it's like, let's just have an honest conversation about like, do we love this school? Do we love this place? If yes, let's keep doing more of these things. If no, let's change these things. And why does there have to be so many steps in between? Let's each step up and have some agency there and empower our teachers, listen to them. There's a lot of amazing teachers out there doing the work. Let's listen to them. Teachers used to be, and they still are to a certain extent, really highly respected in our country. And then it kind of changed for whatever reason. There's like this sense of like distrust almost among teachers. That really pains me. Again, I guess just goes back to the need for quality education, for quality teachers, so that these people can realize that we truly do have your students' best interests at heart and our country's best interest at heart.
Feel free to completely ignore this armchair analysis, but in decades-long history of education in the United States, and I guess this has been like maybe late 80s, early 90s now, post-Reaganite era of education reform, there's a lot of rhetoric of fear, and this is not just in education circles, but also there. And then attached to that is accountability language, which gets co-opted in service of certain goals. And I think a lot of times what happens is that those goals get defined by people who are external to education communities. They're politicians, they're education leaders, whatever it is, but they're not there in the classroom. They're not seeing students' eyes glaze over when they have to think about standardized tests. They're not experiencing the realities of change in public education. And I hope that we can kind of start to reverse some of that trend. But I see the rhetoric of fear and like worrying about falling behind, doing a lot of defining of educational reform over the last 30 or 40 years. And I think we're going to have to get to a point where we turn a new leaf and decide that should not be our North Star anymore, because it's not working.
Exactly. And it's like, gosh, bless the administrators. Side note, my husband is a principal. And, as the leader of the school, the school board, the superintendent, all your stakeholders are looking at these test scores. So it's like they're bending over backwards trying to think of ways to motivate students to try and put in effort on these standardized tests. Bless them for trying to do that, because that's the reality that we're living in right now. But I agree with you. The reality is not just motivating students to do well on a standardized test, but having the courage to say, let's do away with this completely. And let's just try it for a little bit. And let's look at some of these other countries that are incorporating more play across all age groups that are not as high stakes. Let's not try it. It's like we've spent billions of dollars doing some of these things that don't work. So we might as well spend a few more $1 billion taking a risk and trying something that maybe will work. But again, I have gone down to our state capitol in Lincoln, spoke on behalf of a few bills, and both of them have passed. So that was great. But that's another way to show students that, like, hey, no matter where you're from, like, your voice matters. People want to hear from you. But it's not sexy or like exciting when you say like, oh yeah, I got to go down to the state capitol and like speak to the education committee about something. But that is the way that things get changed. We need to have more teachers have the courage and feel empowered to go and do stuff exactly like that. Unfortunately, teachers say, oh, I don't want to get involved in politics, or, oh, that's not part of my job. Well, it is. And if you are interested in keeping your job at a public school and have it be a quality public school and having it, generate these amazing individuals out into the world, you do have to care and you do have to get involved. I wish more teachers would feel empowered to take that step to research a few bills going on in their community and their state, go down to the state capitol and spend a day down there listening. You're going to learn a lot too.
I know we're almost out of time, so I want to try to wrap back around to our questions about Holocaust education. I want to hear from both of you about the role of Holocaust education in your lives, but also how you see that relating to community building, how you see that relating to your students finding their voice and their place in the world, and just really how that kind of brings you together in your schools and why you're interested in it and why you're interested in sharing those lessons.
Katie, you go.
I'm just trying to be a sponge. That's what I'm trying to be. Megan is my mentor at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. That's how I got her here. I got her on the line. She can't let go of me now. She's trapped. When Megan and when these other women, especially a lot of them are, but not just women, obviously, but the people at the museum, when they speak, I listen. I try to be a sponge so that I can take it home. I'm still pretty early on in a lot of these experiences. And so I feel very fortunate to be surrounded by people who are well educated and who do put themselves out there to be in these positions. But for me, I feel like a lot of the conversation about community is what's important. When you break down, especially the Holocaust, it was communities that were affected. It was your neighbor. It was your teacher, your doctor, your banker, whatever, putting names to faces on experiences and situations just helps make it more real for my students, because the Holocaust can be something really overwhelming to learn about. It's heavy, it's difficult, it's in another language or multiple languages. Those are just a few of the hurdles that you have to jump to learn about it. But I think that strong communities were proven to have a better chance of saving their own during the Holocaust. There were pockets of people who saved each other. And so I feel like that's like the real connection there of community, is like if you're all invested in each other, then you show up for each other. But it's a million little things. And that's what that teaching has taught me more specifically, is that you have to start with the little things because they become big things. But I do think that strong communities save each other and help each other. And I think that even though the Holocaust feels very far away, it's not.
That was beautiful. And that was exactly, I don't know if I can say it any better than that. Again, I didn't set out to be like a Holocaust educator. I was going to be an English teacher, right? And so when I started teaching here in rural Nebraska, the neighboring school from where I grew up, I was kind of shocked there was no Holocaust education occurring. And then I was kind of shocked that it bothered me so much. And I'm like, why is this bothering me so much? But it really did. And so I thought, well, if no one is really going to do this, then I will. But I knew that I needed a lot more foundational knowledge and information before approaching this with students, because there are some things as a teacher that you can kind of just wing it and it goes okay. But the Holocaust is not one of those. And so I reached out to some of my mentors, including my mom and some of her friends from, 30 years ago when she was beginning in Holocaust education. And they directed me towards the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. I have been very grateful to spend many, many hours and summers at the Holocaust Museum learning from the leading experts in the field, and then bring that back to small rural Nebraska. There's something about the Holocaust that people are usually interested, genuinely, and intrigued to learn more. And I found that with my students. I did not receive any pushback from admin. I did not receive any pushback from parents or other teachers or things like that. It again kind of became this community thing where I would get asked to go and speak at the PEO or the Rotary Club or a church group, because I then did extensive traveling throughout the world to study not just the Holocaust, but also Jewish life, both pre and post Holocaust. I kind of became like, oh, that Holocaust educator, right? Sometimes it feels like you're kind of on an island, but I was proud to have that role and to be the person that can help inform others at my school and community. I always say this example. A lady at our local gas station, I came in and she's like, all the seniors are talking about this new book that you're reading up at the school. They say it's great. It's about the Holocaust, but they love it. Could I get a copy? Could I read it? Of course. So I went and brought her up a copy to the cashier at the gas station. A lot of students were reading it out loud to their parents. And so, again, it kind of was this thing of community development and bonding through a horrible time in our past. But hopefully, we're learning together, knowing that we don't know it all. I don't know it all, and I don't want to know it all. That's one of the reasons I do enjoy learning about the Holocaust, is that I feel like I can continually learn. I won't ever know it all. And I would say, I'm so glad, because wouldn't that be like the worst thing in the world to be a know-it-all? So I love that I can continually learn and continually pass down new information to students, community members, family. And you don't have to do a lot of connecting the dots. Most of them can figure it out of how this is relevant to us today. No matter what side of politics they're on, they can see it and they can sense the importance of it, and they know in their hearts and in their minds what it means to be a good neighbor. They know that. Sometimes we need a little reminding of that. So I just step in and remind people sometimes of how we need to be as neighbors and community members.
For sure. Well, thank you so much. I do want to end. This is a bit of a tradition that we have on the pod. We always ask what people have been learning recently. So I will go first because I'm springing this on you. I didn't give you a chance to prepare, but I will say for my part, and this is actually kind of related to some of what you've been talking about building community. I'm curious about the place of religion in that, and like kind of the church, especially in rural areas like the ones that you're talking about when you were talking earlier about seeing communities where people don't always get along 100% of the time. I was thinking about the church where I grew up in my small town, because that's just like a community of people not completely getting along, but still showing up time after time. And I think there are a lot of problems with a lot of churches in that dynamic, but I also think that we're kind of losing some of the glue that used to hold people together in community as church membership drops off the face of the earth. So anyway, I've just kind of been vaguely interested in that. So I went on a deep dive and fell down a Wikipedia rabbit hole about Unitarian Universalists, which is basically like church that isn't church, as far as I understand it. But they're organizing principles of community and social justice. And that's what I was learning about. How about you, Kate? What did you learn about in the last couple of weeks?
This might shock you that I haven't been reading about the Unitarian Universalists, but I've actually been listening to a podcast called Long Shadow about the Waco siege. It's actually kind of tracing some of the extremism that we see and kind of following that through line of like, these are some things from the 80s and the 90s in which these seemed like really isolated sort of events, like Ruby Ridge or Waco or the Oklahoma City bombing, and then kind of looking at it through the lens of the media perspective and how that's changing. So it's been really interesting, but not that light and fun, unfortunately.
Well, I will take it a little lighter. There are two things that I have been learning about lately. The first is tulip bulb planting. So my favorite flower is the tulip, and I have been to Amsterdam and the Netherlands many times. Of course, they're like tulip central. And I learned about this technique called lasagna planting. So when you plant your tulip bulbs, you plant them in a layer of 3, like lasagna. So you can get then 3 different blooms that will bloom at different times. And you can actually get a device that goes into the ground, and you can put 3 tulip bulbs in it, and they're already spaced out, and then you just shove it in the ground and like pull it out. So you have your lasagna tulip bulbs planted. So I planted 300 tulip bulbs just a few days ago. I am hoping that the reward is beautiful in the spring, and my mom helped me.
We will be cheering for your garden.
Thank you. The second thing is my English teacher nerd. I have been learning about Amelia Bassano. I don't know if you guys have heard that name before.
I don't think so.
This is kind of risque to say as an English teacher because, you know, William Shakespeare is like the guy, right? But there is more and more information coming out that this young woman named Amelia Bassano actually wrote what was credited to William Shakespeare.
I went to a great book school, and Shakespeare featured very prominently on the undergraduate program. And I have some really big Shakespeare nerd friends, and they are up in arms about this suggestion.
Oh, yeah. Like, it feels kind of bad to say, but it's also like, whoa. I will recommend a book. It's called By Any Other Name by the author Jodi Picoult. She just wrote this book, but has done a deep, deep dive into this Amelia Bassano, and it is quite intriguing. So the book is historical fiction, but of course, Amelia Bassano is a real person. But I'm like, heck yeah, go girl. Like, let's give her credits now. So.
Oh my gosh, would that not just flip us all upside down?
I will tell you one fact that will change the way you think about Shakespeare. Shakespeare, he had 3 children. His son died at a fairly young age, so he was left with 2 daughters. Mm-hmm. He never taught his daughters to read or write. They signed with an X. And so it's like, do we really believe that this man who was this amazing scholar with words and plays and all this would really leave his daughters uneducated? So anyway, that shifted my whole opinion of Shakespeare when I heard that fact. He had like all these very strong female characters, right, in his plays and in his works. And it's like, if he was all about the strong female, why would he not empower his own daughters?
My most visceral response was exactly contrary to everything I tell my students, which is like being willing to unlearn. And I'm like, no, not Shakespeare.
And that's like, even this author that wrote this book, she was like, no. Shakespeare is like up here, right? Like, no, don't say anything bad about him. But we shall see where it all leads.
That's so cool. I'm going to search that as soon as we get this wrapped up.
Well, thank you so much for popping on this call. We really appreciate talking with you. It's been enlightening, and I can't wait to hear more from really both of you. I know that you're going to continue to overlap in some of the Holocaust studies and beyond. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. This has been a true pleasure. This has been fun.
Well, thank you. It does mean a lot to me, especially. So thanks, Megan. I appreciate you showing up.
Of course. Go create some good out there.
And go Buckeyes. Right, Megan?
Oh, please. We play you guys on Saturday.
If you think I'm not calling you as soon as that game's over, just put your phone on mute.
Hey listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1. We're your co-hosts. I'm Chelsea Adams.
And I'm Katie Day. Find our show notes, archives, and resources, sign up for our newsletter, or get in touch with us via the contact form at 16to1.com, all spelled out.
We are so grateful for our listener support. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the show and telling your friends or colleagues about it.
The show is edited and produced by you, Chelsea Adams, and you're also responsible for our show's music.
And you, Katie Day, serve as lead researcher and social media manager.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show.